Thanks so much to all my patrons. Join now to help support the channel and help pick the books I review on this channel. Link in the description. And I am done listening to The World Without End. This is book 2 of the 𝐂𝐮𝐥 series by Ken Follett, which is the sequel to Pillars of the Earth. And I want to give you my unedited thoughts on finishing this book, which actually wasn't just right now. It was a few days ago when I got home driving from Disneyland, but I couldn't do a video while I was driving. I know this is very rare for me. 99.9% of my videos I'm able to actually record as I finish, but not able to do so now. So hopefully I can remember all the things that I want to talk about, but we'll see. We'll see. This is uncharted territory, folks. So yeah, I listened to The Pillars of the Earth a few months back, and it was incredible. Absolutely incredible. It was one of the greatest books that I've ever read. And it's not normal for me to be reading historical fiction, but every now and then I have to take off my Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews hat, put on my Matt's Historical Fiction hat, and almost always when I do that, I end up very, very pleased. Now, I think part of that reason I'm very pleased is because when I end up going to this historical fiction, I end up doing like the greatest hits, and those are going to be good. They're greatest hits for a reason. But oh man, did I love that book. And it's currently right now, it's like number 1 or number 2, I think number 1 favorite book that I've read this year. And it's probably going to go down that way. Lately it's been doing that. I mean, I think 2 years ago, my book of the year was actually Lonesome Dove. And it's definitely historical fiction. So, but yeah, absolutely wonderful. But I was a little nervous going into this one because pretty unanimously I heard from people that this book is worse than the first one, and significantly worse. And a lot of people say that you should read the first one and then be done, because this isn't one of those series like a fantasy series where every book is pivotal to the series. This is one of those series where I mean, I don't know about one of those because I don't know a lot that are like this, but essentially this tells the tale of a church being built in 𝐒𝐮𝐥, this little town in England back in the times when, how many hundreds of years ago would this have been? Probably, I want to say, let's see, about a little under 1,000 years ago. And it's fascinating to hear this book about a small little town going through this building of this church and the intense amount of drama, the Game of Thrones level of drama that went along with it. But it ends on a very perfect note that made the book feel very concrete and that it doesn't need a sequel. This sequel takes place in the distant future from that book and tells a different time period within that town. And I suspect that the book after this will do the same. None of the characters are the same. There's some light references to the characters from the first one, but you could very conceivably read this one without reading the first one and not really miss a beat at all. And so when people told me that, read the first one, then stop, it made sense why they would give that recommendation. But they're wrong because the second book is every bit as good as the first one. And it's written very, very similarly, deals with a different time period, where the first one was all about this construction and went into great detail about that construction. This one improves a bit on that. Now, in some ways, it's a worse book, but in a very key way, it's better. In the first one, there was a lot of pages devoted to going down the intricacies of the construction of this cathedral. Now, most of the book, I don't want to throw people off that because that sounds boring. It is. But a vast majority of the book is dealing with the politics surrounding the construction of this, dealing with the local lords, the total, misogyny in that community, the oppression from the serfdom sort of system, a massive oppression, and what that can look like. And it's compelling. But there was lots of talk about these aspects of building a cathedral that personally I did not care about. I suspect a lot of people did not care about. I read them, glossed through some of them, and my brain kind of turned off for some of them, but I read them. In the second one, it's not about building a cathedral. The cathedral is built. There's some building components there, but it's extremely minor. What it's about more than anything is the plague. And what it was like living in a small town, I guess not small compared to what I think of as a town, but large for what they considered a town. But how they dealt with a large majority of the population dying, and how to deal with this, how to try to figure out why it's happening. You know, one of the people it follows is this nun who is a nurse and trying to figure out and trying to invent ways to solve this problem. And one of the ways they come up with, which is the big way that Europe solved the plague, or at least put it off, was by doing isolation and wearing masks and doing things that today we would think of as commonplace. But back then, you know, they didn't understand germs. They didn't understand how they spread. They didn't understand any of that. They were just trying to, go off what works and balance that out with what the church has said to do for a long time before then, like, bleeding people in the belief that would make them better, when obviously that's not true. But so it took off those boring parts and inserted things that I found fascinating. And the parts that were worse was the fact that in the first book, I felt like did this amazing job at creating the greatest antagonist that I've ever read, and focusing your hatred towards this individual character. Now, there were other people that were detestable, but there was one character that was the evil person that you wanted to suffer the most horrific of deaths, and celebrate that widely if that event was to come to pass. But in this one, it gets branched out, and you have arguably 3 antagonists, and that division of that lost some of the flavor of this book for me. It divided things too much and made me not have a character that is that standout of an all-star, whereas in the first one, I felt like that's what we got in that evil character. I'm somebody that I think some of my favorite characters in literature are the bad guys. I find them deeply compelling. I love a good bad guy, not because I cheer for them, but I love to hate them. And to have somebody that I consider like the all-time best bad guy is a bit disappointing that we lost that in the second book by spreading it out as much as it is. The people that were there, they obviously did horrible things, but when you have less time committed to this person, you separate out your hatred, it just loosens it up a little bit. So that's, you take some, you lose some. In my mind, these are very comparably good books. But when I go through my ranking at the end of the year and I look at what my favorite book was and my least favorite book, this book is going to end up lower on my score, albeit a very, 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 very high 5-star. But it's not going to reach those heights that the first book did. So why? How could I balance out this idea that I feel like they're just as good as each other, but I liked one more than the other? Well, it's because I read the first one first. If I were to read this one first and then read the first one, I would have liked this one more than I liked the first one. And the reason for that, and this is going to sound like a pretty big criticism of Follett, but I have to say it, is once I found out what his writing style is, it lost a lot of the fun for the story. I started to figure it out in the first book. And in the second book, it was very obvious to me that he was using the exact same things that got me interested in the first book, and leaning on them so predictably that it just lost some of the fun. And what I mean by this is Follett has this way he writes, and it's a way that I find that somebody like George R. R. Martin writes. And one of the reasons that George R. R. Martin can write such compelling political sections and this drama within a story, and the how to write a good bad guy and how to write a good guy. And that strategy is that when the reader is expecting something good to happen, something bad happens. And when the reader is expecting something bad to happen, something good happens. But where George R. R. Martin is an expert is he varies that up so much that it's unpredictable. You get this feeling like things are constantly going to be unpredictable in something like A Song of Ice and Fire. But at least for me, I didn't know when those unpredictable moments would happen. There were lots of moments in A Song of Ice and Fire where the person who wanted something good to happen ended up achieving that goal. And the person who wanted something bad to happen achieved that goal. Not so in this series, because literally every single time that something good happens, within about 50 pages, something bad is going to happen to set them back. And you end up with this constant rhythmic aspect of this story that does this wave pattern throughout the entire thing. And once I figured that out, it just took away some joy out of it, because it is literally every single time. And it got to the point where I knew that when the characters thought something good would happen, when invariably it went sour, the only question to me was, how will it go sour? Not will it go sour? And it just takes off a lot of the suspense. And so that is a major criticism I have of this book, and one that I have at the first book too, that I didn't realize until so late into the first one, that by the time I realized it, I was so invested and I was so in love with this book that it didn't really impact the story for me. And I'm quite confident that the third book and the fourth book are just going to do the exact same thing. And so I don't know, I've read these two books. They're two of my favorite books that I've ever read, but I'm not eagerly anticipating reading the third book, because I feel like the third book is going to do the exact same thing. And it's going to be worse in every conceivable way from the second book, because not only will I have my eyes out for it, I mean, they're going to be laser focused looking for these things, and it's going to take away a lot. I've also heard more than the second book. Everybody agrees that the third and fourth books are much worse than the first two books, and that it takes away those kind of politics elements that I really loved out of them and goes into this kind of different thing. And so we'll see. Other aspects of this book that I found absolutely wonderful was the large amount of volume of this book devoted to the war between the French and the English. Even spending some time in France, I thought was a wonderful change of pace. I thought that was very well done. I mean, begin to follow, they never said it in the book. I don't think they did. But I think what we read about was the Battle of Agincourt or Argincourt. I don't know. I've read it. I don't know how to say it. But you know the battle I'm talking about, where the English archers absolutely decimated the French. I think the most amount of archers on the field at one time by the English. And it was just a slaughter when the English were massively undermanned. And there's so many aspects of the battle that followed what I know of that battle that it had to be that battle, right? And reading that in another book, I mean, I read a wonderful one by Bernard Cornwell that I just am in love with, that reading about that from a different perspective was only a good thing. And so, yeah, great stuff. Love this thing. Don't sleep on it. Maybe don't watch my review. It's too late to say that, because I don't want to ruin the second book for you once you understand what I figured out. And maybe it's obvious to everybody, right? Maybe I'm like the last person in the universe to figure that out. But be that as it may, even if you know that's going to happen, as I kind of did, it's still an absolutely wonderful book. And if you haven't read either of these, what are you doing? Go read Pillars of the Earth yesterday. It's amazing. It sounds horrible. The selling point for this book, like a guy wants to build a church, yawn fest. It is anything but. So check these out. They're awesome. They get a double stamp of approval, like a 6-star if it existed. Amazing stuff. And I implore you to read this. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, JD, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗓𝗏𝗏, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, 𝗂𝐶, Tahir, Tommy Rose, Zion, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Joe UK, Kat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Sky, Tyler, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.